This is the weekend edition of the Core Report.
Hello and welcome to the Core Report's weekend edition. We talk about contract manufacturing a lot and the China plus one thesis. So what does that mean? It means obviously that Indian organizations or Indian companies are making parts and components, and sometimes large ones or the whole product, and feeding into a global supply chain system. Now that's been increasing. But here is the case of a company which has been supplying into a global ecosystem and in something fairly critical like aerospace before even the China plus one model kicked in, or at least the way we talk about it today. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Aravind Melligeri, the co-founder of Quest Global Services, or rather it began as Quest Global Services. It's now known as Aequs, a diversified contract manufacturing platform, which started actually with aerospace, something as critical as that, and then added toys and electronics and consumer products into its portfolio, so to speak. Now, the interesting thing about Aequs is that it manufactures across India, France, and the United States. But in India, most of its manufacturing is in Belgavi in Karnataka, and also Koppal, which is also in Karnataka, both not the classic manufacturing destinations that you would think of. I'm now joined by Aravind, who has a bachelor's in engineering from Karnataka itself, and also did a master's in the US in Penn State later. Aravind, thank you so much for joining me. My first question is that you started, it appears, with toys and then went on to aerospace. But tell us about the journey and how the whole contract manufacturing experiment, so to speak, started.
I would like to correct a little bit. We started in aerospace manufacturing, then moved into toys over a decade period of time. The journey for contract manufacturing in what we call as a build to print, the manufacturing in aerospace started as a progression of my earlier path of design of the aerospace components and products at my other company, Quest Global. And that we saw as an opportunity. It was mostly happening in the West. India was not doing much of the aerospace manufacturing. India was growing to be a market in early 2000, to aerospace, aviation side. And there was an opportunity for us to be a manufacturer also. And contract manufacturing was mostly happening. Design was done by the OEMs or tier ones in aerospace industry, and manufacturing is happening mostly in the West. It was a high barrier to entry because it was built over a 30-year, 3-decade or 4-decade or 5 decades in the West. And India was not having all that experience. And that's where we saw, hey, we could discuss with the customer. Like Airbus, hey, if we were to do, would you be interested in doing it? He said, hey, you're pushing an open door. We want to do more in India if we can get solutions out of India. So that's what it started as a journey and for us. And when we saw in aerospace manufacturing, in-country value add was very small. What I call in-country value add was when you actually look at a finished product versus what was added in the country as a value, whether the material, whether the labor, whether various other activities to final product. So that was less than 20% when we started. So we saw that when you look at compared to the service industry, where it's 100% in-country value add, right? So everything is labor driven by that. So we know we cannot be competitive in the long run with at a 20% in-country value add. And that's when we really took a step back and put a roadmap of how do we go from this to 100% in-country value add, at least on some products. And that led us to building a special economic zone, getting into a special economic zone in Belgavi, which was first in the country to do aerospace special economic zone in 2007, opening in 2009, and further doing a vertical integration through partnerships. We had 3 joint ventures, one with Magellan Aerospace for surface treatment, and another with Aravind Melligeri of France for the forgings. So fast forward, 15 years, 20 years, what we call, we are here today. We have products which are 100% manufactured in the country, all the way from raw material to finished goods and getting out of the country. So that has been a journey and a long journey and a significant investment to achieve this journey.
Right. And I'm going to come to the 100% in a moment. But tell me about the very first product that you took to, was it Airbus, you said, and said that, okay, this is what I can manufacture in India. And obviously, when it comes to aerospace, there's a lot of trust involved. There is a lot of checking involved, diligence, including technical, and of course, the people who are doing it. So how did that process go?
Actually, that trust came from a customer. Actually, Magellan Aerospace was my first customer, who turned out to be my future JV partner also in the surface treatment. He was already working with on the engineering design side of it. So there was a trust between us. And when we said, hey, we want to get into manufacturing, here is a one component. They gave the most difficult one to do. It was a wing, the portion of a wing component, titanium wing component for a 777, Boeing 777 aircraft. Okay, they were a tier one supplier to Boeing. And they gave us this and they said, okay. And it was obviously challenging. It was a titanium and hardly anybody was cutting titanium in the country. But we took it as a challenge and we delivered that and they were very happy with what we had done. And then the work started. It took little more than 3 years before Airbus engaged with us, because they needed to see, although Airbus was a customer for a design perspective, but they never came on board for the manufacturing for 3 more years.
But the first component that you made, and I'm going to go a little deeper into that, was for a Boeing 777, not Airbus.
Yeah, no, it was a Boeing 777.
Right. Okay. So now on the wing, can you go a little deeper? I mean, which part of the wing was this? And
this component actually sits inside a wing where it holds the actuator, which sits inside there, enclosed, because wing has fuel, right? It has a fuel in there. If it has to enclose inside, it needs to sit in an enclosed, controlled environment. So that actually sits inside this wing box, inside of the wing box.
So the actuators are those which sort of shut off and on and move the fuel within the aircraft?
More of a flap control and various things you see when they land. All those actuations, pumps are sitting inside some of these things, and they're inside. Sometimes there are fuel pumps also sitting there. So various pumps are sitting inside that system. So it's a wing actually from outside, it might look simple, but it's a very complex internal. It has a wing spars, it has several of the ribs are there, and also the fuel tank is there inside. It's a fuel tank actually. Wing is a fuel tank actually, if you look at it. So and then actuations are there to flap controls and.
Right. The titanium that you needed to make this actuator, you got from where at that point of time?
It came from Russia. And Russia is a big player in the titanium. And historically, Russia has been a supplier of titanium. And this came from Russia. Again, from Russia to US to India. That's how it typically is, a raw material flow happens.
And what was the size of the first order?
So it was small. It was most probably somewhere around a part value add was only about $500, per part. And I mean, when you get to this, as long as that part is there, you're going to be manufacturing this. So typically, at that time, they were manufacturing 5 per month, if I remember right, 777s. So basically it's a $2,500 value add, but the material itself was like a $2,000 material.
Right. And you were making this in Belgavi, and then...
Actually, initially we were making this in Bangalore. We had a very small facility, 20,000 square feet in Bangalore, before we moved in 2009 into Belgavi, to establish a much, much larger zone, 250-acre zone, because we saw this opportunity, but also same time, we saw challenges in developing and retaining the talent in a big city like Bangalore on a long-term basis. And sustaining manufacturing in big cities was also a question mark for us. If you look at globally, manufacturing, aerospace manufacturing especially, has been in hinterlands, like a Toulouse, France, Wichita, Kansas. And not in, it used to be in LA, New York, Paris, not anymore, London. Because cost prohibitive, real estate, all these things are players. We didn't want to do this again and again in India. So we had to start from scratch anyway. So we had to develop the talent anyway. So we went and picked up a place where we had a fundamentally good, capable people existed, but we just needed to train them for aerospace requirements.
And what was the second product at sort of where it went to, let's say, life?
Then we had actually a very large package coming out of from another customer called Sapka, which gave like a 200 different parts for Airbus A380, which is no longer under production. But that gave us we ended up with a very complicated, very difficult one part. And here we ended up with a large number of, parts. And how do we industrialize this? That's where the engineering capacity came. So ultimately, that's how it was. It was like a 200 part numbers industrialized over 6 months or 1 year period, each part. And it was aluminum parts. It was not complex material-wise, but it was a large number of parts to be managed and quality setup process and has to be established and do that.
So the machines, the CNC machines that you were using for this, were you buying it within India or were you importing these?
They were all imported from day one. Because at that time, even I don't see anybody right now doing a titanium machining aerospace grade in India that much machines wise. So still today, all our machines most of our machines are from Germany. Almost all are imported, but most of them are from Germany. Tekelmaho and us established a long-term partnership early on. And pretty much we are exclusive at Tekelmaho facility in Belgavi, if you go and see it. So that's how it is. And it's because it needed to have a proven machines, because we are already entering into a new vertical, new capability we're building. We didn't want to have another variable of machines, which is we don't know yet.
And a lot of your efforts, and I'm still going to come back to that, the point where you've reached 100% value add, but most of your efforts also predate the China plus one thesis. So tell us about, going on that path and whether China plus one has actually changed anything, because you're already plugged into a aerospace supply ecosystem.
The certain customers were very clear. They don't want to go to China big time in aerospace. There's always a case in aerospace because the IP was the biggest concern they had. Aspirations of where each country where they want to be versus, IP is what they were worried, and they were very clear, and they to put whatever was necessary, felt, to do there, and that basically kept an opening for India. They also knew that India has a large aviation market, and actually the whole thing was driven initially by offsets to a certain extent. Air India, first purchase of Air India and Indian Airlines, first time since 2000, historically 2002 had an offset clause in the commercial purchase. And that drove this Airbus and Boeing to put work in India manufacturing. And it did not permit them to, earlier whenever the offset was there, they would buy tea or coffee and meet those offsets. But it was only direct offsets were implemented in 2002. And under UPA 1 and UPA 1 regime, I think then order was placed. And to fulfill that, there was a very large order. And to fulfill that, they had to buy from India. That is why initially they pushed their tier 1 suppliers to go to India, buy and give me the credits. And later they started coming into India. So that's what happened. So that, along with the IP production, they felt more in India because we're already doing design work, and they're comfortable giving the design activities to us. So manufacturing is like a lesser IP concern to the design side of it. So I think that's a combination helped us, in terms of entering there. And China, they have been always cautious. It's not that they're not doing there, and whatever they had, they have a lot of their own facilities, especially engine makers. They set up their own facility instead of having a contract manufacturer. And that's how the whole investment, because they were getting enough credit for the investments, investor subsidies from provincial areas. So they went up, set up their own facilities, they could control their IP better. And that's how it evolved. But when it came to India, people like us were happy to invest and set up contract manufacturing for them, and they were able to work with us and do that. So it was never a China plus one strategy for them. It was about Airbus. Was very early on, the chief procurement officer of Airbus, Claude Richter, basically he took on two paths for Airbus. Airbus used to buy a whole lot from within European countries. They had a give and take. You ought to buy, because we are from multiple countries. So that's how it was. But in 2009 to 2020, when he was a CPO, 2019, 2020, he basically had drawn two paths. One, dollarization and globalization. And dollarization is because they were euro. Their contracts were in euro and all their sales were in dollars. So it was a inherent risk for them. So they needed to convert all the contracts into dollars, supplier contracts. And also globalization. They were buying very locally within euro, and even US buy was not that high. So they wanted to globalize, and they saw India was a sweet spot for them. They could achieve both of them, dollarization and globalization, because we would sign a dollar contract and they would get a lower cost structure also. So that propelled their thought process and focus on India as a manufacturing base. And it has paid out well for them. They are the largest today among the OEMs who source from India, manufacturing side.
I'll now come to the 100% value add. So you said that you're essentially now sourcing raw material, designing, adding value, or manufacturing, machining, and then exporting the final product. So one is, what are those products typically? And I know it could be thousands. But the second is, at this point of evolution, after more than a decade in this space, are you positioned as someone who says that I can do anything or a certain kind of component in the aerospace industry? Or is it that you say that I specialized in, let's say, wing or fuselage, or I'm sure it's not avionics, but some other part of the aircraft, some other sort of aerospace need?
If you segment the aerospace manufacturing, I would segment it into three areas. One is aerostructures, which is like a fuselage, wing, structure side. And then you have actuations, which are basically hydraulic actuators or pumps and that kind of thing, systems and equipments, landing gears. And third one is the engines. Three categories broadly, Then you have electronics and all those things, flight controls. That's a separate area. And a mechanical manufacturing side, the three segments I can consider. And when you look at that, so today we started with aerostructures, and then we also do actuation components, machining side, manufacturing side, and then we do engine components. Third leg is the engine component. So we are today graduated, and today mostly in India we are doing non-rotating engine components in ourselves, and we are also do rotating components in France facility. So our progression is now to do into more rotating components on aerospace engines also. So today, if I were to do, we look at materials perspective and a size perspective. The most volume what we do today is titanium and aluminum. Although we do titanium, aluminum, steel, and various other alloys, but majority of material comes is aluminum and titanium. And most of our parts are under 2 meters. Most of them are under 1 meter. A cube, 95-98% fits under 2 meters, so lengthwise. So that's also driven by the surface treatment facility you have infrastructure. It's not just machining. After machining, you have to do the coating and various surface treatment. And that's a whole other infrastructure you require. Tank size is defined. All those things are a much longer lead item to set up and establish the approvals and coming in. So it's a whole thing. And then also on the other side, it comes to forging, size of the forgings you are manufacturing. So it's you have to think through the whole ecosystem, how much can you support? And that's how it gets driven.
Right. And when you said engines, would that mean that you're working with GE or a Rolls-Royce or a CFM, or is it working with the
customer like Safran? We work with them today. They're our customers. We continued dialogue with Rolls-Royce and various other people. They're interested to do some things. And again, we are focused on, higher value, vertical integration, and we look at forged machined products. Forging a certain capacity, or forging is more, size is more driven towards, it's a 10,000 ton hydraulic press. Although it's a very large press, but it's still small from the engine. We can do more business jets than a large engine.
And all these components, and I'm going to come to toys because we've almost forgotten about that. But all these components, how do you ship them out from Belgaum? I mean, they go by road to
Belgaum to Bangalore or Mumbai, then airlifted from there to, we are delivering 100% on time and zero defects with Airbus for the last 40 odd months. Example, so our ability to meet the schedule is extremely good from India. During the COVID also, we ran through, we were able to support that, even the global leader disruption, but it goes by road to the Bangalore and then from air from there. And we deliver on a drum beat every 48 hours to their line there from Belgavi.
It takes roughly, 15 to 20 hours to reach Bangalore?
8 to 9 hour drive by truck. And then it goes in a belly of an aircraft, and it lands there. And within 48 hours, actually, after we ship from Belgavi, it is in a customer facility.
Okay, so it's going in commercial aircraft. You're not using...
Cargos are going every day, right, from Bangalore. It can be both. It depends on how DHL and FedEx manage their...
By sitting in Belgaum, you're not necessarily at a disadvantage because you're at least 8 to 10 hours away from, let's say, any big city.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do Mumbai, we can do Bangalore, both of them are. And by sea also, if you need to send something, we do like doors, for some overwing emergency doors for Airbus A321. That goes by sea. They go by container. So we pack a container every week and we ship it out of Mumbai.
These are the latest A321, which in India, of course, we've just seen them come in thanks to Indigo and so on. Okay.
21 Neo, yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to aerospace in a moment, but tell us about toys. So you said, actually, I got that wrong. I thought you started from toys and then went to.
Yeah, we never originally thought about we'll ever enter toy business. But in 2015, Hasbro came to us, saying that, hey, we wanted to diversify from, we have significant spend in one country, and then we want to diversify to other Asian countries we're looking at, and we look at India could be one other option. But we don't want to go to the traditional toy manufacturing companies in India because they don't have a global understanding of the global quality expectations. And you are in aerospace industry, you know what is the requirement. So would you be you have built ecosystem here. They came and saw what we had done in aerospace from scratch, and this is what needs to happen in toy industry also. Ultimately, to get the most value out of the country, out of the product, value add. So you need to do the same thing. That's what they told. I said, we looked at it. That was actually a China plus one strategy. First time what we saw, it was nobody talked about China plus one, but they just, it was a China plus one strategy.
Terms usually come later, yeah.
Yeah. So we looked at, I said, I don't even know how we can be competitive to China. That's what my point was, And when we looked at, we dug deeper, we saw there was a 20, 25%, up to 30% labor content in these products. And China is like a 3 times labor cost in India. So when we ran the calculation and we saw that, and we were able to show them at least 5 to 7% cost savings on the overall product. And since polymer was available in India, so material is a significant portion. Packaging was available in India, could be developed, all these things. And almost all the material was there. Almost 80% of the purchase bill of material was local. So we felt that, hey, then it was using unskilled labor. So I said, India has strength. What we saw always was engineering talent, which had leverage for IT services, engineering design services, and aerospace manufacturing. Then large pool of unskilled labor, which is there, right? Predominantly in the farming, which could be easily trained for a week or two and get into a shop floor assembly line. So we saw, hey, opportunity to leverage the second leg of this, India's strength, what we saw. Unskilled labor, it was already highly, value add within the country, in-country value add. So between the two, we felt that we could do, and customers said, we will do it. We are willing to support you if you want to develop this, And that's how we ended up entering with a proof of concept. We took a 50,000 square foot facility in Belgavi itself and set up that. And we saw that we grew. Then we added, we have now today 600,000 square foot facility in Belgavi in doing toys activity. Then we set up a brand new cluster in Koppal to toy cluster because we saw we couldn't do more in Belgavi because it was like aerospace also was growing and toys was also growing, and we needed a unique ecosystem where labor pool was much larger, available, unskilled. And we picked Koppal because Koppal is one of the least developed district of state of Karnataka. It doesn't have any water resources. Only depends on 4 or 5 rains they get a year for any irrigation. Any kind of farming. So we felt that that has a large pool of people and we should go there. And it was only an hour and a half away from Hubli with the new roads and everything coming in. And Hubli is a kind of we looked at as a hub and connectivity perspective. So Bangalore and Belgaum and Hubli is also like only 1 hour, 10 minutes drive. That's how we decided to build an ecosystem there. So we have 400-acre zone in Koppal where we built a toy cluster. The first of India's toy manufacturing. And fortunately, COVID was a good time. Aerospace, we took a big dip because of the overall this thing, and toy was booming during the COVID. But post-COVID, the inflation US and Western side, toys have come down and aerospace continued to shoot up. So this is how we envision to a certain extent we're able to balance these economies because one is very consumer focused, the other one is very long term, B2B business. So, but the challenges are different today in the toys business because China's economy is in a little bit challenging situation. The price points, what they're offering to the customers is much, much lower today. And competitiveness again has come back. They're just trying to use the depreciated assets and trying to compete. And so our competitive situation is a little bit challenging, right now. But it is how it is, right? China plays with their strength of capacity and, and invested capacity. And we just need to work through and figure out how do we choose. And we are more focused on now today doing a lot of domestic market also we are entering, So we're entering the domestic market, introduce some products with some partners to Indian market. So we feel that with the India restrictions on it through the QCO and various other import restrictions has come in, tariff side, 70% duty is there. So we need more toys in India. Now, we didn't even have a domestic manufacturing facility till recently. Only last year we opened one in Kopal. Otherwise it was only export oriented. So we are now more focused on supporting domestic market also. So it's evolution. That's what I would say.
So for the company, that's Aequs, what's the split between revenue from?
About 80% of our revenue is aerospace today, and 80%, yeah, and 20% comes from the toys and consumer. We also have a small cookware business which we started in Hubli, and we entered a new vertical called advanced technology products, which is focused on consumer electronics, again precision machine products for the consumer electronics industry. So I mean, this is bringing a little more diversification to us on a precision machining side, which we feel is the biggest strength of India in our mind because of the engineering capability, engineering capacity. These are two verticals play with the mechanical metals, whereas the plastics is where our toys and other consumer business.
You've done some fundraising from institutional investors in recent years, 3 different investors, or at least 3 lead investors and others in 2 rounds, from what I could see. My question is not so much on the fundraising, but what do investors see in this? Because I can see that some of those investors are typically investing in technology bets where they're looking for 8 and 10 times return, like tech companies and so on. Now, this is far contrast from that. This is not going to deliver 8 to 10x returns, at least as I can see. But at the same time, I can see the consistent and steady nature of this business in the long term or the medium to long term. What's your view?
We have invested ourselves over more than 15 years in this business. Only first time in 15 years we brought in the external investors because we wanted to feel comfortable ourselves, our ability to scale and to drive profitability and all these things. And that was the reason, because very difficult to have the very short-sighted investors 3 to 5 year view. And when I'm making an investment call for 15-year ROI on a 10,000 ton forging press, it's very difficult for them to meet that expectation. So I had to really manage this. We manage this and we're able to do that. And we have done all long-term investments are done. 3 clusters, we have 3 verticals. We have all the base is all set up. That's why we felt we could bring investors and we can demonstrate the return on the capital employed, profitability, all those things much easier. Ultimately, we see each of these verticals growing 20 to 30% every year for the coming years. Through 2030, at least, I can see that. Opportunity for India, whether you call China plus one strategy or overall diversification, is very good. And no other country in the world has the volume of engineering talent at unskilled labor, both as India has. That's a demographic dividend, what they call. We don't see in a foreseen future any other country able to supply that number of people, workforce. And these were the fundamental thesis these investors are in. None of the investors who came in are short-term. They're all public market investors. They will be there even after we go be a public company years to come. That was the commitment for me to bring them on board. I want somebody with me in my port to be there longer term. I don't want people to just exit, post IPO or anything. We ended up splitting the round into 2 pieces because one, we brought in somebody as a private equity who will have a shorter window, 5-year window, but other ones are public market investors or family offices who are much longer term horizon. They believe in the thesis, thesis and value creation over a longer period. And that's how we are. We are invested in this business for a long period of time. They're permanent investors.
As you look ahead, do you see, for example, everyone's talking about semiconductors, which is obviously a different thing, but also involves precision and very sensitive manufacturing conditions. Are you looking at other things either as an extension to aerospace or something completely different, but again in the precision manufacturing space?
That was the part of our expansion into consumer electronics space. We focused on the housings and enclosures and that kind of a stuff, than precision manufacturing in that business, than a electronics portion of the business, because there are enough players already established for decades to do into that business. And we have enough opportunity here. If I was not growing, I could understand. I'm already growing and I can deploy my capital here very efficiently because we already have a large base with me already. So that is the reason we have focused on this. We are into consumer electronics, but we focused on the non-electronics portion of the consumer electronics, or a precision machining portion of the consumer electronics, precision molding portion of the consumer electronics. That's a kind of an area where we are caught involved in that. So look, I mean, ultimately, again, when you look at in-country value add, come back, look at it. And if you want to make cell phone exports today, we may be doing, but in-country value has to increase. So components are to be manufactured. We are more of a component manufacturer on the mechanical side. And that is very important for us to capture more value out of this. I mean, bringing together and assembling them, and some labor content will be 4 or 5% of the product value, versus we want to get to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. When you finally get a chip out, most probably that will be like, chip itself is 30, 40% of the value of the product most of the time. Especially the newer generation products, when they come out, cost could be 30, 40% of the total product cost of the product. It is a journey for the country also. You start somewhere where you start doing assembly and then start industrializing. And as government done has a good job in looking at PLIs, and then you look at a full product, now they're looking component level PLIs, and those things will help to bring these things.
I mean, I know PLIs is a subject that we could have gone into, but I sort of try to avoid that. So, India is aiming to have a large manufacturing base. At this point, its share of manufacturing to GDP is lower than what it aspires to be. Critics would say it's quite low, actually, given that we want to grow, we want to bring people out of agriculture. You're doing some of that already. What is your sense? I mean, can India become a much larger manufacturing economy or a manufacturing power than what it is today? And in your own journey, do you feel that this can be replicated by others and therefore contribute to that target or objective?
I believe India has, I would say, best opportunity right now to make that transition or drive that, because of demographic dividend and also global geopolitical situations. What it is that India is in a favorable spot. The key comes down to is just not let's look for the domestic consumption, look for global exports also. And we need to be looked at holistically, and capacity needs to be built to support that. And the biggest challenge we see a lot of times when we look at other Asian country investment, also cost of capital. Long-term capital availability and the cost of capital in the form of debt is the biggest negative what we see as a country today. If there is a way to address consider the infrastructure type of investment, it could be accelerated very fast in my view. I absolutely believe whole investment thesis we have is betting India to be manufacturing based. Whether that as a GDP, as a percentage, can we increase that versus services industry versus other thing? When I translate back into in-country value add, it's still a challenge. Out of that 13-18%, whatever we are doing as a percentage GDP, in-country value add perspective, it could be still smaller. We need to focus ability to employ people, the areas, and also see how we can much easier to do with a lower capex, kind of a business. It's like toys, for example, has a much lower capex to dollar revenue compared to aerospace. So it could be, we need to drive some of these things, not for domestic market, because domestic market in toys is like a very small as percentage of global market of 80 billion. India is only $1 billion. So we should look at export side also, because then we can capture a lot more, lakhs and lakhs of people could be working in this industry much easier. And that will automatically bring the portion as a GDP, in my view.
If people visit Belgaum, what's a good restaurant to go to, or what's the dish they should be looking for to get a good flavor of the place?
I would say a restaurant, and I eat. Niyaz is the place, has the best biryanis, I would say. Should eat. Niyaz is a restaurant, and they have a great mutton biryanis.
So biryani is the thing to go for when you visit Belgaum. Right. That's very useful, and I'm sure people will.
If they're Hubli, they can go and eat what they call Sauji food, Sauji meal. There are a couple of restaurants out there, and that's something they're very famous.
And if it's sweet, I'm sure it would be Belgaum Peda.
Dharwad Peda, Hubli Peda, Belgaum Kunda.
That's absolutely useful, and I'm sure most people will note that. Thank you so much for joining me, Aravind.
Thanks, Govind.
That was the Core Report with me, Govindraj Ethiraj. Do stay connected with more of our coverage at the Core. You can check out our website or sign up to our newsletter for our exclusive stories, one in-depth feature a day on www.thecore.in. Do also track us on LinkedIn, where we usually post synopses or extracts of our top stories and interviews. We would love your feedback on how we can make business more interesting and relevant, including, of course, India's vibrant manufacturing sector. So write to us at feedback@thecore.in, and thank you once again for listening.